So this particular game was part of the after the evening session while I was at the ministers' conference, and a few of us were sitting down, yes, in the bar, and we were talking, and you know, ministers, we have our own unique challenges and things that go on, and we were, you know, all kind of sharing some things that, you know, we've been going through, whatever, and one of the fellows at the table, his name was Tim, and he's from Canada, and he looked and he said, "So what do you want?" And so then comes, you know, I want my congregation to get bigger, and I want us to bring in more income, and you know, you kind of went around the group and, you know, various things like that. What do you want? And we just kept answering along those same lines. We were not as gracious and high-minded as our friend Rick, even though we were ministers. You know, there were the requests for the hot partner. There were, you know, and it's like, what do you want? What do you want? What do you want? And we're all just like, let's like Rick is like, well, what answer are you looking for, right? And he's looking at me like, what do you want me to say, right? And then Tim looked at, do you want to be happy? And just like Rick, well, yeah. So then he looked at me and he said, so what do you want? I want to be happy. And he says, there's a test tomorrow. And so sure enough, you know, this was actually second to the last day. So this was Wednesday night that this happened. And so Thursday morning, we walked into the meeting room, and Tim says, what do you want? I want to be happy. So let me just check here. How many in this room would like to be happy? Good. Because if not, I would like to have prayer with you afterwards. This is the second in a series that I'm doing on the 7 spiritual laws of success, which, as I mentioned last week, is one of my go-to books. And one of the things that I love about studying the science of mind and spirit is that, you know, I have my go-to books, and most of us do. And they're different for people, and it doesn't matter. And the thing that I love about my go-to books is that every time I engage with them, I'm coming at it or gleaning something different. And I just love that. And that's why I'm always reminded of the quote from Heraclitus, which I think I put up on the internet this week or last week, that basically says that we cannot step into the same river twice, because it is not the same river and we are not the same person. So, needless to say, however, I think it's been like maybe a couple of years since I've really pulled out and looked at this book, that this time, instead of looking at 7 distinct laws, each of which has suggested ways to apply them, I'm looking at them from a place of how they are interrelated. And that has really been kind of a fascinating perspective for me. And so that is how I am approaching it this time around. Now, I named this talk Direct Success because we are the authors of our success. We are the directors of our movie. We have absolute influence over our experience of success. Now, last week we talked about some of the things that maybe the world tells us is successful. And again, we're talking to you like money, power, fame, fortune, arm candy, whatever that is. And we talked about that and decided that those are all things. And they are all things that we put outside of ourselves and put our goods someplace else. So it's like, when this happens, when I get this, when, and so it's when, it's the carrot. We never get there. What about thinking that we are successful right now. So 3 points today. The first one is we are successful when we are in the flow of life. And the second point is that we all have an internal compass that steers us in the direction of our highest good. And the last point is success and happiness are two sides of the same coin in its purest sense. Now, last week we talked about the law of pure potentiality, which basically says that we are in a field of limitless possibilities. The only thing that limits us is the limits that we place on it. And we talked about how being in the stillness, and just taking that time to quiet the mind, to be still and know, is one of the ways that we connect with that infinite field of possibilities. This week, we're going to talk about 3 more laws. The law of giving, the law of karma, and the law of least effort. And it's really interesting as I come at it from the standpoint of interconnectedness, how much these are kind of in each other's pockets and go together. So the first point is we are successful when we are in the flow of life. How many times have we talked about the idea of going with the flow and just letting go and letting God? There are all kinds of sayings that we employ to suggest that there is a path, a current in the stream, if you will, that leads us to our highest good. And that when we relax into that, when we allow life to happen, when we surrender to what is, then we are in the flow. We also, if you think about the flow of life, there's also another part of it is that, there's always like even flow, sometimes it's fast, sometimes it's slow. There is a rhythm to life. And again, when we allow that rhythm, when we don't try to swim upstream, when we don't resist, then we are in the flow and life unfolds more easily. So from the standpoint of the law of giving, and basically the law of giving actually could be better said as the law of giving and receiving. So how many times have we heard that? How many times that we've talked about the importance of giving and receiving? Why? Because that's how life works. We breathe in and we breathe out. The tide comes in, the tide goes out. The sun rises, the sun sets, etc., etc. There is the giving and the receiving that is a natural part of life. There was a quote I saw on Twitter the other day, and it was really cool, and to paraphrase it says that successful people uplift others to be successful. They motivate them, they inspire them, and they don't tear each other down. That's successful people. Inspire. In spirit. Breathe spirit in. Now, the law of karma is another word for the law of cause and effect, which Ernest Holmes, that is the fundamental law that Ernest Holmes put forth in The Science of Mind, that law that is as sure and true as the law of gravity itself. It works all the time. It is no respecter of persons. It doesn't matter what is put into it. It will respond. And so in this particular case, so what the law of karma says is that everything that we do has a consequence. And that how we deal with those consequences can also affect how we experience the life and how we experience the consequences, even when some of those are a little difficult. And Deepak Chopra gives the example of an athlete who has a mishap and he breaks his leg. You know, and it's because he did something that wasn't, you know, if you think about, usually if how many of you are athletes who have ever played sports, usually when you get injured, not always, because there's other people involved, but oftentimes it's because you have kind of maybe done something, maybe you made a mistake. So he busted his leg, so what can he do? Well, he can sit around and go, oh, poor me, life sucks, my leg is broken, I can't play sports, woe is me. Or he can look at it and say, well, maybe I can use this experience to teach other people not to make the same mistake. Okay? Or maybe I can build or make a device, maybe a brace or a splint or something, some contraption that may prevent other people from being injured in the same way I was. 3 different ways to look at the consequences of choice. And so in the law of giving, one of the ways that could show up with respect of being in the flow is you've probably heard the parable of the talents. And basically it goes like this. A master has 3 servants, and he gives them each a number of talents. And then says, come back in, whatever period of time and, show me, what you've done with them. And so the first 2 go out and they either invest or they put it to work, and they've multiplied. So when the master shows up, the one guy says, look, I took your talent and I invested it and this and this and that, so now I'm giving you 10 talents. And then the other guy says, oh yeah, and I took your talent and I hired some people, this and that, and I build this thing and it, whatever, and here are 20 talents. Third guy says, well, I took your talent, and because I wanted to keep it safe, I buried it. And so now, here is your 1 talent back. So who do you think the master was pleased with? Who do you think was more satisfied with their experience? Who was operating from love and who was operating from fear? Any questions? So that is the law of karma, cause and effect in the flow, because whenever you stop the flow, you back it up and you prevent it from coming back around. So where in your life are you cutting off the flow? Where in your life are things not unfolding? There's a saying that if you are experiencing lack in one area of your life, you are probably experiencing it in other areas of your life as well. And the final idea about being in the flow of life is the law of least effort. Now, one of my favorite sayings is that easy is good, and unfortunately that's been taken to mean lazy, sloppy, whatever. It's like, no. Easy is good is because nature, right? Have you ever seen a blade of grass? Gotta grow, man, I gotta grow. Right? You ever seen any of that? Have you ever seen a stream? Okay, I gotta do this. Nature does what nature does with effortless ease. Jesus talks to us about the lilies of the field, and they don't sow, they don't want, and yet they are amply provided for. Wayne Dyer says that far more important than goals in your life is your willingness to allow things to happen and your willingness to know. And that is what is being in the flow of life, is that you are allowing life to happen. You are allowing challenges to become opportunities to be more expansive. Was the quote recently about that challenges come around for one reason and one reason alone, and that is to support us in becoming our highest self. I just love that. And the second point is that we all have an internal compass that steers us to our highest good. Ever heard the saying, go with your gut? How many of you do that? Your gut doesn't lie. So when you are considering an action, we all have the opportunity to check in with ourselves. And when we are living in the moment, which was part of being in pure potentiality that we talked about last week, another part of that is being in the present moment, because it's the only place where creation happens. And when you have that awareness of being in the moment, and I'm telling you, the fastest way to get there is just take a breath. Stop and take a breath is the fastest way to get yourself in the present moment. And when you do that, then you can ask yourself, how does this choice feel to me? How does this choice feel to me? And I can't think of a time when I have taken that moment, just that moment, to check in with myself. Does this feel good or does it not feel good? And if I follow what feels good, there is always a positive outcome. And it's not just positive for me, it's positive for other people as well. And have you ever said to yourself, boy, I think I'm going to regret this? And that's usually when something in your gut is telling you, don't do it. No. And you do it anyway. And then guess what? Probably not the outcome that you are looking for. So we always have the opportunity to check in with ourselves and allow our innate intelligence. Because we know, we say, we teach that all of the good there is resides inside of us, that we are expressions of God. Therefore, the infinite intelligence of the universe, the one mind is, our mind is connected to infinite mind. Infinite mind knows the right answer. Oftentimes when people are taking exams, the prayer that goes with it says that the same mind that wrote this exam is taking this exam and already knows the answer. And so just taking that conscious moment, you do know, and you know that you know. The other part of the internal compass kind of falls under the law of least effort. And again, what that law is about, it is about being in the flow and allowing life to be life, But then there's also two other components to it. Three, actually. One is acceptance, and to me, accepting and allowing are part and parcel of the same thing. That when we accept something, that doesn't mean we're saying it's okay. We're not saying that we like it. We're not saying, we're just saying it is what it is. And again, as I shared last week, to me, that is not a dismissive phrase. It's a phrase that I use consciously, and it's my way of saying, this is what's happening. I get to choose how I'm going to move through it. It is what it is. I can't change what happened. However, I can change and have direct say-so on how I'm going to respond and the choices that I'm going to make moving forward. The second piece of that is also taking responsibility. Wherever you go, there you are, right? So, when something happens, at some level, there's a responsibility, and it doesn't necessarily have to be something huge. And I just want to be very clear that it doesn't mean that there's something messed up in your consciousness. That one's still floating around our movement. And, back in like the 60s and that was pretty, you would actually have people have the lack of compassion to say to someone who's having a hard time, so, what's in your consciousness that created that? I have never felt loved or supported by someone who has made that statement to me, ever. In fact, sometimes it downright pissed me off. Yeah, thank you. Oh, we I'm back there saying, ooh, she said pissed off. It's like, you know what? Ever since I heard some other things from the platform, it's like I'm still not going to some of the places, but at any rate. I've even heard F-bombs from the platform, but I'm not going there. I won't. In fact, I read somewhere that this whole idea of what's in your consciousness is the highest form of spiritual malpractice. And I believe that with all my heart. That is just RSBS, religious science, and the other, see, I'm not going to say it, but everybody knows. The G-rated version is belief system, but anyway. But we do play a part. Did we allow it? Did we ignore it? Or is our responsibility about how we're going to respond and move forward? So it isn't necessarily that this thing happened and we had something messed up in our consciousness or whatever. It may not be that at all. But we do have, our responsibility may well be, how am I going to move forward from this? What choices am I going to make as a result of this? That's where the responsibility can lie, not necessarily in the event itself. And then the third point, and this is again under the law of least effort, is defenselessness. Spell checker said there's no such word. But that's a word that Deepak Chopra used, and my interpretation of that word is, again, at one level, it's part of allowing. And actually, two words, the one word that really came, two words, is one is non-resistance. How many people have heard that idea? Non-resistance, which means you're not going to struggle against it, you're not going to fight against it. It's, again, back to allowing. And then the other one is detachment. And detachment just simply means that you don't have your hook so far into something that it could take you to a place that is not supporting your good. So that oftentimes just letting things be as they are, not being attached to a specific outcome, having an intention but not outlining what it's supposed to look like. That's detachment. Again, it's about allowing. It's about not resisting. I took, what was it called, the Millionaire Mind Seminars. I don't even know if they still have those anymore. But back in the 90s, in the early 2000s, it was a big deal down in Southern California. And they sold these T-shirts, and it said, "Struggle is optional." And I say amen. Can I get an amen to that? Struggle is optional. Yes, there are things that are challenging. Yes, there are things that require some concerted effort, nose to the grindstone kind of stuff. But it doesn't have to be struggle. That's the swimming upstream. That's resisting what is. That's trying to change something that's not going to change. All of these things that get us into conflict. And, oh, by the way, I don't feel very good when I'm struggling or I'm resisting. That doesn't feel good to me. When I'm being defensive about something, that doesn't feel good to me. So there's the other check-in. And as the reading that Betty did for us this morning, that there is spontaneous right action, that there is a right choice that can be made that supports our good. And we get there by being still and knowing. So we're successful when we are in the flow of life. We have an internal compass, an internal barometer that can steer us towards our higher expression of good for ourselves and others. Which leads me to the last point, that in the model, in a spiritual model, success and happiness are two sides of the same coin. Have you ever noticed that the things that outwardly we may ascribe success to, wealth, fame, fortune, just go on and on. How many people do you know of that have these things yet are still not very happy? Wonder why that is. And yet, how many times, have you seen the documentaries where, people that are in countries that right now are not experiencing the same level of modernization and technology and source and whatever, and yet you see children who have, by our standards, next to nothing, and they are happy and playing and have a good time. So it's not about things. It's not about having. It's about being. And that's what we're going to talk about next week, is about being successful. That being is part of being successful. And that in a true spiritual sense, if you are happy, then you are successful. Notice the order. Not if you are successful, then you're happy. If you're happy, then you're successful, and then you're happy. That means that at any moment in time, we can choose to be happy. We can look around and see what we are grateful for. We can look around and see all of the ways that our life is blessed, and we can choose to focus on that and turn away from the things that aren't quite there yet, or anything where we're feeling or believing or telling ourselves lies about lacking. We get to choose. So, would you like to choose? What do you want? Here we go. What do you want? Okay, let's try this again. What do you want? Happiness. No, you say after me. I am happy. I'm not even saying I want to be happy. No. What do you want? I am happy. Let's pray.